Coming up on this Monday edition of Newsline at noon, South Korea's chief nuclear envoy in Washington for talks with his US counterpart seeks ways to resume multinational negotiations on ways to denuclearize North Korea. Candidates running in Wednesday's local elections make their final pitches to win support from undecided voters, with rival parties saying it's too close to call in most of the key regions. Plus, FIFA could hold a revote to find a new host for the Qatar World Cup in 2022 if corruption allegations can be proven. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
It's noon Monday, June 2nd here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Ju.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this lunchtime: South Korea, the United States and China may be edging closer to working out a way to restart the long-stalled six-party talks on denuclearizing North Korea.
This according to Seoul's nuclear envoy, who is now in Washington for talks with his U.S. counterpart. Choi You-sun reports.
This latest visit to Washington by South Korea's chief nuclear envoy has many wondering if it could offer a turning point for the long-stalled six-party talks to denuclearize North Korea.
Starting with last week's South Korea-China foreign ministers meeting, we've been discussing the conditions to resuming denuclearization talks with countries like the U.S. and China. To that extent, we plan to hold an in-depth discussion with the U.S.
The envoy's remarks hint there may be possible progress on the North Korean nuclear issue ahead of Chinese President Xi Jinping's expected visit to Seoul this month. When Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi recently came to Seoul, China asked South Korea to actively push for the talk resumption, to which the South expressed its will to set the pre-talk conditions. In fact, Seoul has taken a more flexible stance on the matter as of late, recognizing there's need for a venue to discuss disarming the North, albeit under a set of conditions. The South Korean negotiator in Washington said this is because the regime conducted 3 nuclear tests, 2 of which took place since the talks were suspended 5 years ago. Therefore, Seoul will seek to mediate between Washington and Beijing as the U.S. insists the North take concrete steps to prove it's ready to give up its nuclear arms before dialogue can reopen. Japan recently agreed to lift sanctions if the North reopens a probe into the abduction of Japanese nationals is another issue of concern. When their nuclear envoys meet Monday, Seoul and Washington are expected to agree that Tokyo should remain committed to the 3 parties' cooperation on resolving the North Korean nuclear issue. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
North Korea is known to have about 70 submarines in its arsenal, but until recently, they had never been seen. Looking to flex its muscles to the outside world, a documentary has aired on North Korean state television that flaunts the regime's underwater firepower. Park Ji-won has more.
This is part of a recent documentary aired on North Korea's state-run Korean Central Television. It's the first time Pyongyang has publicly released video footage of its strategically important Romeo-class submarines and submarine base. North Korea is currently believed to have about 70 submarines. Around 20 are Romeo-class, their largest submarines, while the rest are of the Shark and Salmon classes.
It seems like North Korea showed its Romeo-class submarines, although they are rather old models, to promote that it has the capacity to block off all of South Korea's shores.
The documentary also showed recent footage of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un visiting with female troop units and encouraging other tank units in their night training. North Korea's state television also showed the inside of Kim's private plane. Experts say North Korea is using the documentary to flaunt its self-defense capabilities. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery and their families from 8 different countries will call on the Japanese government today to settle the issue once and for all. The Korean Council representing the victims says the former sex slaves, their families, and civic activists plan to demonstrate in front of the Japanese Diet's lower house on this Monday. They will also condemn Tokyo's efforts to deny that Japan had coerced the women into military prostitution by trying to review an apology statement from the early 1990s. The victims from countries like Korea, China, the Philippines and Indonesia will then give testimonies and will then deliver a written request to the Japanese government to take legal responsibility and to compensate. Following a landmark agreement last week, Japan will send government officials to North Korea to open an investigation on the Japanese citizens kidnapped by the North decades ago. Speaking to Japanese national broadcaster NHK on Sunday, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said Tokyo was planning to send officials from its Foreign Affairs Ministry and National Police Agency to Pyongyang. Suga did not elaborate on the size of the delegation or when the officials will go. He added that Japan is working with related nations on the final negotiations of the bilateral agreement and that other nations view the abduction cases as human rights issues. Pyongyang agreed to open the investigation in exchange for Tokyo easing economic sanctions on it. North Korea admitted in 2002 that it had abducted 13 Japanese nationals from 1977 to 1983. But Japan claims many more were kidnapped.
And back here in Seoul, a 90-day parliamentary investigation into the government's handling of last month's Seoul ferry disaster has begun, but it's off to a shaky start. The special parliamentary committee in charge was scheduled to launch the probe by visiting Pyeongmokkang Harbor in Jindo this Monday afternoon and offering condolences to the families of the victims. However, committee members belonging to the ruling Saenuri Party are not part of the group. They say they were told by the victims' families to push back the date of the visit, which conflicts with a claim made by committee members of the main opposition party, who say the ruling party members had other scheduled events for the day. Opposition party members will go ahead with this afternoon's trip. And candidates running in the June 4th local elections have hit the home stretch with just 2 days left before voting day. The ruling and main opposition parties are making their final pushes while downplaying their chances of a big election day victory. Arirang News' Kwon Soo-ah explains why.
With just 2 days before voters take to the polls for local elections, rival political parties are trying to figure out where they stand in key swing regions. Although the media is forbidden from releasing opinion polls 6 days before elections, internal polls within the parties are allowed, and they suggest a number of tight races. The last official poll numbers from last week showed the ruling Saenuri Party had the upper hand in 6 regions and the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy in 5. But the ruling party now says it is only certain of victory in 4 regions, and the main opposition party believes it has a high chance in winning in just 3 regions. Both parties are referring to their traditional strongholds. As there are less than 2 days of campaigning left, political analysts believe the two parties are merely trying to boost support and encourage voter turnout by suggesting they are facing unfavorable odds. This was also seen in their reactions to the early voting turnout on Sunday. The ruling Saenuri Party expressed concerns about the high voter turnout among young people, while the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy said the number wasn't actually that high, considering that the majority of the country's 35,000 soldiers are part of the 16% of young people who voted in advance. Experts say voters in their 40s to early 50s will hold the key to the local elections this year. Kwon Soo-ah, Arirang News.
Now, the chief of Korea's central bank says there are now higher expectations over the bank taking a more active role in sustainable growth and financial stability. In a conference Monday, Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol said the expectations were brought on by the 2008 global financial crisis. He added that more research is needed for the central bank to pursue different kinds of policy goals. While he said the global economy is on the path to recovery, slow growth in China and the high level of debt in Eurozone economies could pose a threat. Financial authorities are keeping a close eye on 3 credit card companies here in Korea. They recently resumed operations after a 3-month business suspension following the largest personal data leak in the country's history. They will offer greater incentives for the reporting of illegal practices to entice customers and order firms to send text messages to their customers when a transaction is made on their card. Our Kim Min-ji has this report.
This footage from 2011 shows a credit card issuer urging passers-by to sign up for a new credit card, saying they'll receive free baseball tickets if they do. This is illegal as the value of the freebie exceeds the annual membership fee of roughly $10. To prevent such practices, financial authorities implemented an incentive reporting system back in 2012. The system, however, proved to be ineffective as it was complicated and the incentives were low. But now the Financial Supervisory Service has raised the incentive to 5 times the original amount. They say people who report on illegal methods to entice customers, such as issuing credit cards on the street or offering excessive giveaways, will be able to receive roughly $490 in incentives, up from $98. The stricter measures are part of efforts to prevent credit card companies who recently resumed business operations from engaging in aggressive promotional activities. 3 of the nation's leading credit card firms, KB Kookmin Card, Lotte Card, and NH Noyab Card, have resumed operations after a 3-month business suspension for their involvement in the biggest personal data leak in Korean history. Financial authorities will also make card companies offer free text message alerts to their customers when they make purchases of over $50 on their cards. Card companies say the messaging service will cost them millions of dollars, but with their profits on the rise from last year, it seems they will begin offering the service in the coming weeks. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Korea's trade ministry says progress is being made in bilateral free trade agreement talks with China. At an 11th round of talks in China's southwestern city of Meishan last week, the 2 countries discussed synchronizing their trade regulations. In the area of competition, trade ministry officials say a consensus was nearly reached on e-commerce and that offers were exchanged with regard to the service sector. When the next round of FTA negotiations take place in Korea in July, Seoul is expected to offer market liberalization on the manufacturing front, particularly in the petrochemical, steel, and machinery sectors. Beijing is expected to offer market liberalization on the agricultural front. And now to the world of sport, where the decision to have Qatar host the 2022 World Cup has added another layer of controversy. A British daily says it has proof that FIFA officials took bribes in the bidding process, and if that's proven true, a revote is likely. Our UDN has the details.
It was back in December 2010 when Qatar beat out Japan, the United States, Australia, and Korea to host the 2022 World Cup.
I'm speechless because you see my voice. I lost my voice because I screamed so loud. But congratulations, Qatar. It deserved it.
But the bidding process for the global event was entrenched in corruption, according to the Sunday Times. The British Daily says it has obtained proof that Qatari official Mohammed bin Hammam paid FIFA officials $5 million while lobbying them to vote for Qatar. The Daily says it has hundreds of millions of emails, accounts, and documents that detail the payments. The revelations have FIFA facing calls to rerun the bidding competition for the 2022 World Cup. FIFA's Vice President Jim Boyce says he would support the move if the corruption allegations were indeed proven true. The decision to have Qatar host the World Cup had been at the center of controversy given its lack of footballing history, as well as its intense summer heat.
So I think many people were surprised when it went there. So I don't think they'll be surprised that perhaps there are suggestions that it wasn't all above board.
Qatar strongly denies the claims and insists that bin Hammam never had an official role in supporting the country's bid. Yurian, Arirang News.
And time now for a look through the international headlines we're following this hour. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim, standing by at the news center.
Eunice, there's been a barrage of criticism over the U.S. government's prisoner swap deal with the Taliban.
Right, Mark. The negotiations freed 5 senior Taliban officials in exchange for the last remaining American POW in the 13-year conflict in Afghanistan. But many are asking whether it was the right thing to do. Now, not among those questioning the deal were the parents of the 28-year-old Army sergeant. In an emotional press conference earlier this morning, they expressed their joy at the news that their son, who had been held captive for nearly 5 years, was coming home. He's currently at a military hospital in Germany receiving medical care. The unprecedented swap deal, though, is being seen by some U.S. lawmakers as a dangerous precedent that puts a price on American heads, and also because the 5 Taliban militants freed in exchange were high-level members of the government that the U.S. toppled back in 2001. Explaining the deal, U.S. authorities said the POW's health had taken a turn for the worse. U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel expressed hope that the exchange would lead to more breakthroughs with the Taliban. In Belgium, authorities have arrested a 29-year-old Frenchman for the deadly Jewish museum shooting that killed 3 and left 1 person severely injured late last month. He is identified as Mehdi Nemouche and was arrested at a train station in southern France on Friday in possession of firearms and ammunition. Prosecutors say he was also holding a video in which he apparently claimed responsibility for the May 24th shooting that had triggered alarm at various Jewish sites across Belgium. Prosecutors say that Nemouche had a criminal record and had spent over a year in Syria, where he forged relations with radical Islamists. Violence in Iraq show no sign of wearing off, as the month of May was the bloodiest month so far this year, registering nearly 800 deaths. The figure comes from the United Nations mission to Iraq, which said more than 600 civilians and nearly 200 soldiers were killed in sectarian conflicts, some 40% of those in the capital of Baghdad. Members of an al-Qaeda affiliate, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, intensified attacks as parliamentary elections to form a new government was held on April 30th. April was the second deadliest month with 750 casualties. And some good news to report. 2 Italian priests and a Canadian nun arrived in Cameroon's capital Sunday after being freed from their captors, who had held them for nearly 2 months. They were abducted by gunmen in the parish of Marua, near Cameroon's border with Nigeria, in early April. Though no group has claimed responsibility, the Nigerian militant group Boko Haram is being suspected. No details of the circumstances of their release were given. The clerics had been working on improving water supplies and fighting the spread of HIV in Cameroon.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about 11. Koreans work some of the longest hours in the developed world, so you'd hope that retirement would at least mean some well-deserved rest. But a new OECD report shows the average Korean is still punching the clock more than 10 years after the official retirement age. Song Ji-sun reports.
In Korea, you might retire from your main job, but that doesn't mean you're no longer working. That's the picture painted by the OECD's latest report on effective retirement age. The report notes the effective age of retirement is well below the official age for receiving a full pension in most countries. Some countries like Korea stick out, as while the official retirement age is 60, the effective age of retirement is over 70 for men.
In many European countries, residents are actually retiring a good few years before their official retirement age of 65. Women in general retire a year or two earlier than men, but Korean women are also the ones working the longest after retirement, trailing only Chile. Korean women are working just as many years as men, effectively retiring at 70. Analysts say the figures clearly indicate how many Koreans cannot live on their pensions or savings alone, so they have to search for a new job in their golden years. Government data shows more than half of Korean men in their 60s were economically active last year, with 29% of women in the same age group taking part in economy. 송지선, Arirang News.
Researchers here in Korea have developed a new type of antibiotic film that kills bacteria and germs in a matter of minutes, saving both time and money. Son Jung-in shows us how it works.
This is an antibiotic nanofilm newly developed by local researchers. When they dribble a few drops that contain germs onto it, most of the bacteria die within 5 minutes. Looking through the microscope, the germs are destroyed. The sharp, rough surface of the nanofilm acts like the edge of a knife, ripping apart the cell wall of bacteria on contact.
These blades are literally nano-size, which means it causes no harm when a person touches it. But when it is brushed against bacteria, their cell walls are torn off, which eventually kills them.
It takes over an hour to kill germs via oxidation, but it takes just 15 minutes using this new wall-destroying material. It uses a cheaper version of nanographene and titanium oxide, which costs almost 1/10 the amount of commonly used silver nanoparticles. Experts believe they can expand their research to come up with other types of sterilizing products for sanitation in the city, including wastewater treatment.
Using this new type of technology, we anticipate to easily get rid of bacteria lurking at public facilities, such as on handles or seats in buses, subways, and bathrooms.
The results have been featured in the renowned academic journal, Advanced Functional Materials. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
Good afternoon, I'm Lee Ji-hyun with your latest weather updates. Well, after the unseasonably hot weather we had last week, temperatures will be 5 to 6 degrees lower than yesterday, hovering in the mid-20s across the region. So yes, we'll finally get some relief from the heat today. The clouds will stick around throughout the day, and rain is here to drag down the temperatures. Well, it's been raining down south since early this morning, and rain clouds will soon dominate the whole peninsula. In fact, rain is in store on and off throughout this week. And for today here in Seoul, we are expecting 5 to 20 millimeters of precipitation during the day, but regions down south will receive heavy downpours up to 80 millimeters. So please gear up with your rainproof accessories before heading out. And also please note that the heavy rain advisory is still in place for the mountainous regions in Jeju Island. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The high in Seoul will rise to 26 degrees Celsius. Now that's 5 degrees lower than yesterday, while high in Daegu and Gwangju will rise to 27 and 22, and Busan will hike up to 24. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like down on Jeju will reach 24. Daejeon and Dokdo should see a high of 25, while Mount Gyeongang tops out at 19. Well, that's all for me today, but I'll be back with more updates tomorrow morning.
And those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Jinju and I will be back at the same time tomorrow. Thank you for watching.